Necho II of Egypt commissioned a fleet of Phoenician ships to attempt a circumnavigation of Africa, the exact size and extent of which was unknown at the time. The Phoenicians, whose home cities were in modern Lebanon, were among the boldest mariners of their time, having explored the Mediterranean basin and established colonies along the coast in both North Africa and Spain, even entering the Atlantic and exploring north and south of Gibraltar and establishing colonies outside the Mediterranean basin. They had also frequently served the Egyptians before, most of whom were notorious landlubbers, so they were familiar with Egyptian trade networks outside the Mediterranean that connected with South Arabia, the Persian Gulf, and India. Once the fleet was launched at an Egyptian port on the Red Sea, they would proceed south along well-established routes until they exited the Red Sea and entered the Indian Ocean. Once they turned south along the coast of modern Somalia, they were entering unknown waters. As it was known that this was a voyage into the unknown, they are said to have taken seed with them to plant crops to harvest along the way. Doubtless they also had trade goods to trade with native peoples to replenish their supplies. They are thought to have established camp on the west coast of Africa opposite the island of Madagascar for their first winter, during which they planted and harvested their crop. Once they had crossed the equator, they would have noticed the sun being further and further to the north in the afternoons instead of being to the south, a fact that was mentioned with some incredulity in Herodotus' account of their voyage. Rounding the Cape of Good Hope, formerly known as the Cape of Storms, would be a major accomplishment for the expedition, as this was the furthest south that they would voyage, and they were now traveling an unknown, but it turned out relatively short distance west. Once they had traveled north beyond the Namib Desert, they would find it easier to replenish their supplies. They are thought to have again set up a winter camp somewhere in the vicinity of the Niger River Delta to rest, repair their equipment and ships, and harvest a crop. They would then continue west along the coast of West Africa. Once they turned north, they would be approaching waters with which the Phoenicians were familiar. Arriving in the vicinity of the Straits of Gibraltar, the expedition would encounter Phoenician colonies where they would be able to replenish their supplies and equipment after their nearly 3-year voyage of exploration. Upon entering the Mediterranean basin, their voyage would be coming to an end, and they would encounter more and more Phoenician, as well as Greek and other ships, and some of the major cities of the western Mediterranean, such as the Phoenician colony of Carthage. Once they had crossed between Carthage and the north coast of Libya, near modern Benghazi, they would soon be at the end of their voyage at the Nile Delta.